YouTube. Sandre here. Now, this is gonna be another one of those videos where I'm just gonna react live, essentially, debunk something on the go. It's this guy. He has this video called Top 10 Things That I Hold to Be True. Or the title is something like that, at least. And this YouTube channel is called Press for Truth, which is ironic because this guy denies climate change, he denies evolution, other kinds of stuff. He brings some of these stuff up in this video. And honestly, it's just bad. Like, this guy, I have no idea why people watch him. Like, a lot of the things he says are so easily debunked, which I will demonstrate. Now, there is at least one point, though, in this video. I can't remember which point it was, but there's one point regarding gender differences where he's actually correct. And I'll get to that, because, you know, even a broken clock is right twice a day, I guess. But anyway, let's begin.
These 10 things I hold to be true. Allow me to explain. In this video, I'm going to make 10 statements that I hold to be true, followed by a brief explanation explaining my position on each statement. And I'm doing this for the purposes of encouraging rational debate so that we can better understand each other and all the problems that we face together. So I will make a statement that I believe to be true. I will then provide some facts and information to back up my claims, and you can then provide some of your thoughts and your counter-arguments in the comment section below, and then I'll move on to the next statement.
I'll do you even better. I'll just fucking respond in a video. How about that?
I will warn you, however, if you are easily triggered, you should know that I am a white, heterosexual, cisgender Christian male. So with that...
Oh my god! So scary! So scary! I'm scared! No, seriously though. Yeah, no, I do understand in a way why this guy brings that up, because in our social and political climate, yeah, there is a fucking stigma against white, heterosexual, Christian males. There are. But, you know, guys like this don't actually help that fucking stigma. You'll see what I mean. By the way, before I begin, let me just make this clear, because I probably get some new viewers, maybe some of his fans even, who watch this fucking counter video and are gonna make all kinds of assumptions about me just because I respond to this guy. Let me just point out that, no, I'm not a feminist. No, I'm not some fucking SJW. I've made numerous videos against both feminists and SJWs. I'm not a Marxist. I'm not a fucking postmodernist. I've made videos against those fucking stupid ideas as well. I am pretty much a fucking anti-SJW, to be honest. I really am. I'm one of those rare finds, if you will, in this so-called community, who actually criticizes people who are against SJWs too. I do, all the time. I criticize people like Sargon and Computing Forever, all of these people. I do, easily. Because I don't have any fucking allegiance. I don't have allegiance to anyone. I respond to it, whatever the fuck I want, and you as a viewer are just gonna have to fucking deal with it. Don't like it, watch another video. What can I say?
Statement number 2. Life begins at conception upon fertilization, and therefore, no one has a right to kill another human being due to inconvenience or any other circumstances. This boils down to one fundamental question, which then logically leads to another, which is, when does life begin? And subsequently, when, if ever, should someone's rights override the rights of another? And it is my position that life starts at conception. The very definition of the word conception describes the moment a child is created. And from the very moment of fertilization, a human being is created, which then develops through various stages over a period of 9 months. When it comes to the question of when life begins, you have to draw the line somewhere. Some would say that it's okay to have an abortion before the brain waves are developed, because at that point it's not conscious, and therefore can just be considered tissue removal. But what about in the case of a brain-dead comatose patient who may or may not come out of it? Is it okay to decide that they are just a bunch of cells like a cancer that should be removed? The line must be drawn at conception, and therefore a life is present at any and every stage of the fetus's development. Therefore, abortions are the act of killing a human life.
Right. So this is where he goes off the deep end. This is where it starts. And look, let me just make this clear. I think abortion is an evil. I do. I don't like abortions. I think they're horrible. I'm very saddened by the fact that they are even necessary in the first place. Nor do I think abortion should ever be treated like some kind of fucking birth control. No. You are preventing a human being from being born. That is never, ever a good thing. Whenever you have to step in and manually cancel the future of another human being in becoming, that's never a good thing. Nor should our society in any fucking way support that. There should be a social stigma against abortions. I'm serious on this. I do. So in that sense, I understand what this guy is saying to some degree. But here's the thing, though. Even though I do think abortions are an evil, I also think they are a necessary evil. And I do think that up until the second trimester or so, you should not be allowed to... up until that point, abortions should be legal. After that point, however, I don't think so. Whenever we suspect that there's a possibility that the fetus can actually feel pain, that's when I say no. No, fuck no. Abortions should never be allowed after that point. Because here's the thing, let me just explain how an abortion actually happens. What they do is that they literally break every goddamn bone in that fetus's body. They do. They break every single bone, and then they vacuum that fetus out. That's what they do. It's not a pretty image, I know. And if I could, I would honestly put an image right here so you could see the result. Because it's not pretty. It's gory, and it's horrible. And whenever you see an image of a fetus that's just been aborted, you realize, God damn, this is heavy. I wouldn't go so far as to call it murder. I think anyone who calls abortion murder is wrong. But that being said, it is something that is horrible and should should only be done when it's actually necessary, and only up to a certain point. But here's the thing, though. This is where I want to get to, though. He says life starts at inception, but my question then is, so what? What's your point? Does human life start at inception? I would agree. Yeah, it does. Now what? What's your point? That in of itself doesn't mean anything. That doesn't carry any weight in of itself. Like, who cares? Also, your example of a comatose patient, well, that person has already been born. That person has already been a person, conscious. That's why we have to be careful when it comes to comatose people, whether we should pull the plug or not. Because we already know that they've been conscious. If you prevent a fetus from ever developing to the point where they can have a consciousness of any kind, then you don't have that problem. Like, this is just logic, all right? You simply just set up this standard of, oh, life starts at inception, so therefore, no abortion. No, why? Seriously, why? When you have a simple embryo or even a simple fetus, is it human life? Yeah. But you can't call it a human being, though. It's not a baby yet. Now, like I said before, the reason that I still think abortion is, although necessary, still an evil, is because it's not a human being yet. But that being said, that's the fundamental truth. It's not a human being yet. And treating it as such is silly. And it's not true. Besides, what about extreme cases? Do you still hold that view when it comes to people who have experienced a rape or incest? These are things you're going to have to actually evaluate. And if you are still just as staunch during those cases, well, I'm going to have to say you are the monster, not the person who wants to do an abortion. There's nuance to things, It's not black and white, and even abortion is one of those things where there is nuance. Yeah, I don't think I have anything more to add here.
Just think about this. If a woman stabs a baby with a knife immediately after it's born, it's called first-degree murder. But if she decides to do it, if she chooses to murder the baby before it is born, we call it a human right. Did you know that?
Also, it depends when, because in most nations across the world where abortion is legal, it's only legal up to a certain point. For reasons I just explained. Like, again, whenever we suspect that the baby is actually, you know, it has a neurology that's actually capable of feeling pain, that's when I think that an abortion, no, you cannot possibly justify an abortion at that point.
Recently, a man slipped an abortion pill into his girlfriend's drink to kill their unborn child, and he was charged with manslaughter. But if she chooses to do it, that's somehow okay? You can't have it both ways. And then there's the question of pregnancy.
Right, I mean, you know, this is an interesting point. It is. I still don't think it supports you in any fucking way, to be honest. But it's still interesting. It's still interesting that you brought this up because, yeah, I mean, it does make you think a little bit. But when you do think about it, you start to realize that, hey, this is a person who violated the autonomy of this woman. And also, if you look into this case, I believe that he wasn't actually charged with infanticide or murder or anything, but rather things that had to do with violating the autonomy of the woman. So looking at the legal landscape, this case doesn't actually support you even on that point. It just doesn't. This is nothing but a red herring.
As a result of rape. And as we've seen, that debate can get extremely heated.
Somebody gets raped by somebody.
Oh yeah, by the way, fuck this guy. I've seen this video. This guy does a roundhouse kick. Fuck this guy.
And they're like, I'm 16.
He's an example of fucking SJWs who, honestly, if they did that shit to me, I would slam his fucking head against the concrete. I would. I wouldn't give a fuck. Like, this is the kind of behavior where I think that if you want to sock them as a response, fucking do it. Hopefully that will teach them a fucking lesson.
10-year-old and I can't have this baby. Think you should keep it?
It's a baby. If someone is raped and she gave birth and she decided to kill her 3-year-old child.
I meant to get your phone.
Look, rape is a horrible, awful, ugly violation of someone's rights. But if that leads to pregnancy, and your choice is to kill a completely innocent and defensive life, the most innocent of all life forms, I might add, if your choice is to terminate it because of the inconvenience of your violation, well, I would argue that that is worse than the rape itself. The bottom line is, no one should get to choose when someone else should die due to inconvenience or any other circumstances. If you agree or disagree, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. All right.
Again, it doesn't matter if it's a human life or not, because it's not a human being. You know? Look, when you have the moment right after inception, when you have that little embryo, it's largely, you know, indistinguishable from your own cells as an adult. Now, if you want to be consistent about this, if you want to argue that an embryo is a human being, you will also have to argue, just to be consistent, that your skin flakes that fall off your skin every single day are also pieces of human being. That they are also human being on their own. Because they are actually more complex than the beginnings of an embryo. Again, your own standard, I'm just saying.
Capitalism is not the enemy of a free society, but rather it is a vehicle to get us there. The notion that the inequality that we are seeing is based on economic unfairness is also untrue to a large extent. Marxism is based on the idea that the proletariat was going to take over the bourgeoisie and overthrow those who were making themselves better off at the expense of enslaving others. And that's a very noble cause. But I would argue this doesn't apply today, because we live in a relatively free country here in Canada. You can become anything you want. You can develop a craft. You can become an entrepreneur. The Marxist ideology and focus, much like the white privilege claim, has shifted to, if you are black and unsuccessful, then that's because the system was built to be against you.
All right, here we go. I've already explained, because what this guy's trying to get at is that postmodernism is somehow Marxism, which it isn't. I've already made a video explaining this thoroughly. I debunked Jordan Peterson, for instance, when he goes on these fucking tangents where he claims erroneously that postmodernism is just modern Marxism, which is simply not true. Postmodernism and Marxism are not the same thing. They're not even really compatible. For instance, Marxism embraces a grand narrative. Postmodernism rejects that sort of thing. So postmodernism and Marxism are not the same thing. Do they have similarities? Yes, they do. And are they equally bullshit? Yes, I would agree there too. They're fucking bullshit. What can I say? Sorry if I offend any Marxist or postmodernist in my audience, but it's true. I have to be honest. That being said, it's also important to keep in mind that, because I suspect, I think I know where this guy's going to go with this, but let me just preemptively say that Marxists may be socialists, but socialists are not necessarily Marxists. Marx does not have monopoly on socialism. Socialism is simply just an economic model, so is capitalism, and actually, unlike what guys like this want you to believe, Canada is not a capitalist nation, nor is it a socialist one. Just like the US is not a capitalist nation and a socialist one, at least not purely. These are mixed economies, you know, where you mix the two economic models. Some things in society have a capitalist engine, other things have a socialist engine, okay? This is just observable reality. These are mixed economies. Actually, the best economies in the world are mixed economies, where you have a differing degree of capitalism and socialism.
Or if you are a woman and you are unsuccessful, that is because the system was built to be against you. But no, that's not the case. Anybody can partake in any...
Depends on the time period. You know, there was a time period where, as a black man, yeah, the system was against you. It's not the case today, but, you know, it definitely was the case.
...thing in this country. You can be anything you want, do anything you want, if you work hard enough. And don't get me wrong.
Oh my god, I'm so tired of this fucking... pull yourself up by your bootstraps nonsense. Yeah, look, some people can do that. You know why? Because they have tools to do that. Vast majority of people are not going to be successful. Social mobility, okay, the ability to move between economic classes has decreased in the West. This has also been in concordance with reforms that have taken away some of the socialist policies that were brought in during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This has also happened as more and more of the public sector has become privatized in these nations. Sorry, these are just facts and logic.
The divide between the rich and poor is a huge problem that needs to be addressed, but we need to focus on the root cause, which in my opinion is an overly dependent society, which has given the ability for banks to create loans based on nothing and then charge interest on those loans.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's bullshit, but it's not the only problem. I mean, honestly, look. Jeff Bezos, he's like the world's richest man, I think. He's worth like 130-something billion US dollars or something. He's like grotesquely wealthy. But it was calculated that if you took his entire fucking stack of money and you divided it, he could essentially eradicate, all on his own, homelessness in the US. What is it, like 5 times over or something like that? You know, you have people in the world, dude, whose personal wealth rivals or even surmounts entire GDPs of certain countries. Now, when you, as a single individual, have so much wealth that it blows away the GDP of a fucking country, I would have to say, fuck that shit, you have too much. It's not like this money goes back into the system either. We know from experience, just because of how wealthy these people are, that they're obviously not putting that money back into the system. So it becomes a bottleneck of the economy. Again, these are just facts and logic. You cannot deny this. If this wasn't true, they wouldn't be so grotesquely wealthy now, would they? But because they are so grotesquely wealthy, we can directly observe that yes, all they do with that money is put it away in a fucking vault. They don't use that money to reinvest into society. So no, the income inequality in of itself is the problem. Now, don't get me wrong, banks essentially inflating money 10 times over, which they've been doing for, I think it's like almost 2 decades now or something. That's a problem too. It's unsustainable. It can't be done. Also, the Federal Reserve, which isn't actually federal, it's a private bank. People don't know this. That's bullshit too. You need to do away with the Federal Reserve Bank. It's bullshit. And again, if capitalism really was so wonderful, why is it, as the Western societies have moved more towards a capitalist society the last few decades, why is it that social mobility has decreased, personal income inequality has increased, and why have wages stagnated? Like, dude, these are, once again, just facts and logic, observable facts. Deal with it.
The bottom line is, what we have today is crony capitalism, and what we need is true capitalism.
Oh, this was nonsense. But it's not true capitalism. Okay, you know what? That's the exact same thing that that fucking Stalinists say. You know, whenever you criticize the Soviet Union or Mao's China or North Korea, you have these fucking people, these authoritarian socialists, who will say, "Oh, but that's not real socialism." No, it is. It is. I even made a video explaining how the Soviet Union was indeed socialist. You know, it was a socialist economy. You cannot deny this. And by the way, I also made a video explaining how the Nazi Reich was capitalist, because we were. Now, some people will say, "Oh, but they call themselves National Socialists, so we had to be socialists." No, 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 no. I don't care what they call themselves. Look at what they did. Actions speak louder than words, my friend. They were capitalists. So, you know, look, I hate this shit from both camps. You have socialists who argue that certain things weren't socialist just because they don't like it, and capitalists who argue that some things are not capitalist just because they just don't like it. No, no, it's capitalist. Just call it what it is. It's capitalist. This is literally what happens in a capitalist society when you take away regulation. It is. I don't know what to fucking tell you. These are market forces.
Voluntary mutual exchange in a free and open fair market. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comment section.
Again, that's not necessarily capitalist. Now some of you who are watching this might be scratching your head like, what the fuck is this guy on about? But no, it's true. It's true. Have you guys looked up free market socialism? It's a thing. Yeah. I don't necessarily think it would work in reality, perhaps, but it still theoretically exists. So yes, even in a socialist society, you could have what he just said. Open exchange of goods. All socialism is, just like all capitalism is an economic system. That's it.
Below. All right, statement number 5. Overpopulation is a myth. It's been said for well over 50 years that at the rate humanity is going, we would soon be out of resources and doomed to extinction because of our overindulgence, when the fact is, this has proven to be the farthest thing from the truth. There is plenty of oil, plenty of fresh water, plenty of land to accommodate billions upon billions of more people than the already 7.5 billion we currently have here.
Oh, bullshit. Bullshit. Where are you pulling this from? This is nonsense. Absolute nonsense. It's not that, you know, we don't have more oil, because, yeah, of course, there is more oil far beneath us, which we could dig out. The thing is, though, peak oil refers to the fact that there is a point where oil will no longer be economically feasible. It doesn't matter if you have more oil in the ground, it's not economically feasible to actually get it out of the ground. That's the point. You know, it has nothing to do with if there's more oil or not. It's just the labor you have to put in to actually get it out is going to make it more expensive. You know? Like, why do you think that we went from literally just sticking a fucking pole into the ground in Texas in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, and a fucking fountain of oil would come out? Why do you think we went from that to literally having to build platforms out into the sea to get oil? Because oil became progressively harder and harder to get. We had to put in more energy to get it. Eventually, you will reach a point where it's no longer economically feasible to do so. That's peak oil. Same thing with water. Technically speaking, there is enough fresh water for everyone. There is. It's not that there isn't enough fresh water to go around for everyone, because technically there is. We can actually multiply our population a couple of times and still have enough fresh water for us. The problem is, where is that fresh water located? And who's going to pay for transporting that fresh water? That's the problem. We still don't know. So the problem isn't that you don't have enough water or enough oil. It's just that, well, the oil is going to get harder and harder to get. The same thing with the fresh water.
Some of the most common arguments are, there's not enough food to go around. Actually, the world currently produces enough food to feed 10 billion people, and there are only 7.5 billion of us. So there is currently plenty of food to go around.
Again, where is that food grown, though? And where is it going? Who's paying for transporting all the food? You know, starvation is a real thing. There are nations right now where you have starvation because they don't produce enough food. Then there's other areas of the world where they produce an abundance of food. So yes, statistically speaking, if you look at the net result, there should be enough food for everyone, just like there should be enough water for everyone. But it doesn't matter. It's not about how much you produce as much as where it is produced and where you have to transport that food.
And yes, hunger remains a huge problem in some parts of the world, but this is not because of the number of people. It's caused by the banks who lend money to these countries and then charge interest on these loans that were created out of nothing. Okay, what about water?
Sure, that's part of it. Putting the third world into debt is a horrible practice, and it's very real. But no, dude, you cannot deny that you still have a problem with food not being grown in these areas, or the food that is grown is sold outside of the nation.
Surely we're running out of fresh water. No, actually the Earth is awash in water. In fact, oceans make up 70% of the planet's surface with an average depth of 6,000 feet. But that's not drinkable fresh water. Actually, since the year 1900, fresh water withdrawals, which is the production of usable water, has increased at a much faster rate than the human population has increased. Fresh water withdrawals have increased 7-fold since 1900, while the world population has only increased by 4-fold. This suggests that our ability to access usable water increases faster than population growth. Okay, but we're growing...
Oh my god. Desalination of water is really, really, really expensive. Because these salts that are solved in the water that you have to get out in order to not fucking poison people, they want to stick in the water. Now, the most effective way we know of removing the salt from the water to make it fresh water is to literally have a high pressure and just ramming water through a filter. And the filter will catch the ions, the salt. This is very expensive though, because it requires a shitload of energy. You are so full of shit. Now, some parts of the world, such as in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, or even in California, they're talking about making desalination plants, which of course for them it works because they can actually afford it. And yes, in certain parts of the world, that is what they will have to do to get enough fresh water. But it's not like it's going to be the first choice. Because, again, it's really, really expensive.
Exponentially. Surely that's a problem. No, we're not. We are growing, but it's definitely not at an exponential rate. In fact, our rates of growth are declining. Between 1950 and the year 2000, the world population grew at a percentage of 1.67%. Between the year 2000 and 2050, it is expected to grow by just 0.77%. So the rate of our growth is actually slowing. So the evidence shows that we are not overpopulated at all. And the bottom line is, even if...
Here's the thing. We know that in nations where they've been industrialized, over a few generations, women start to have fewer kids. This is what we know. All right? So, yes, it is true that the world population isn't increasing as fast as it used to. Thank God. But it is still increasing. And we can still face a situation where we have about 10 billion people. Which is due to how resources are, divided. Not counting how many we actually have in total, but rather how they are placed across the world, that will transgress the actual available resources in that area, in some places of the world. This is just a fact.
If we were, there are only two ways to decrease the global population. That is to increase the death rate or decrease the birth rate. So if you think we're overpopulated, feel free to be a pioneer by not having sex or killing yourself. If you...
Ever heard of a condom? It's like a little piece of latex. Put it over your dong, and then you can get fucking. And you can fuck multiple times. Yeah. It's actually very secure. Protects against STDs too. Yeah, that's what people can do. Not having more kids is really not that hard. Now, I don't think you should have a fucking one-child policy like China had, although I do understand why they had it, to be honest. But you can just educate people. And honestly, like I said, in the industrialized part of the world, women on average have fewer kids anyway. Okay? It happens naturally. So, again, you're painting this out like it's like some fucking ridiculous notion, but no, having fewer kids is really not that hard.
To agree or disagree, let me know in the comment section below. Number 7, Islamophobia is a nonsensical term. When an SJW became the Prime Minister of Canada, the issues of free speech took a back seat to being politically correct. To the SJW, language isn't something to be used to identify truth or objectivity or for rational debate. No, to them, language is a social construct that can be violent and therefore should be regulated. When it comes to being critical of Islam in Canada, the left have become so hell-bent on being politically correct that they fail to see the contradictions within their own use of their own terms like Islamophobia. First of all, Islam is not a race. And second of all, a phobia implies an irrational fear of something. But what exactly is irrational about having concerns with a religion and a culture that is at odds with our Western Christian standards and values? The bottom line is, religious groups should be free of hate and discrimination and unchecked aggression, that's for sure. But enacting legislation like Motion 103 or Section 319 of the Criminal Code, the hate speech provisions, this is not the way to go about it. The policing of our language is the first sign that we're devolving into a tyrannical dictatorship. So the term Islamophobia needs to be rejected for the nonsensical term that it is. If you agree or disagree, let me know your thoughts.
No, look, I agree. Islam is nonsense. It is. It's a very violent religion. It is. But so was Christianity not too long ago. And then some people are probably going to try and say, like they've tried before and failed, but Christianity had a reformation. Yeah, it did. But not because it wanted to. It was forced to. By secularists. It was only when the church got less influence in society that it actually had to change. See how that works? In fact, when Christianity ran rampant and had basically, a lot of power, you had the Dark Ages. Literally no scientific advancement almost for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Very sad chapter in the history of man. So yeah, Islam is dangerous, I agree, and we need to be cautious of Islam's influence in society. But here's the problem though, you belong to a camp that literally wants to do a lot of the same things. Like in Alabama, it was just passed that they would have their own version of the Sharia police. Christian morality police. Bravo, well done, well done. But Christianity is totally not like Islam in any way.
In the comment section below. Alright, statement number 8. Third wave feminism is a cancer, and the wage gap is a myth. I have no issues with feminism. It's a noble cause.
You know what, I think I'm just going to skip this because, again, this is something I largely agree with. The wage gap, it's a myth. What can I say?
Threat of climate change is a psychological operation being waged by elite globalists who seek to form a singular one-world government.
Oh boy, here we go.
Simply put, the science on man-made climate change is pseudoscience at best. And in fact, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was caught red-handed falsifying information and fudging the numbers to fit their narrative. In 2009, in the lead up to the Copenhagen Summit on climate change, a hacker hacked into the servers at the Climate Research Unit at the University of East Anglia. This hacker leaked thousands of emails exposing what became known as ClimateGate, and the fact that the world's top scientists and so-called experts in the field were colluding and fudging the numbers.
No, they weren't. I mean, honestly, dude, fuck me, this is so dumb. And I'm so tired of this claim. No, it wasn't. It looked like it, but it wasn't. You know the word trick? It's actually used in meteorology and in climatology. Don't believe me? Just take a look. Yeah, it doesn't mean what you think. This is really weak sauce, dude. Really weak sauce. So yeah, and also, no, look. We know that some gases... this will actually go back to what I said when I was responding to Computing Forever. Some gases are so-called greenhouse gases because of something called molecular symmetry. Some molecules have high symmetry. What this means is that they can move in a way, they can do certain movements, vibrate if you will, in such a way where they can absorb and release heat very efficiently. CO2 is one such gas. This is known, this is proven, these are just facts and logic, my dude. Let me actually show you a video demonstrating in real time the power of CO2 and how it actually leads to the greenhouse effect.
In this experiment, we will show the role of carbon dioxide in the greenhouse effect. Carbon dioxide is one of the gases that absorbs Earth's heat, or thermal radiation. In this experiment, we will show carbon dioxide absorbing thermal radiation, and so mimic the greenhouse effect. So what is the greenhouse effect? Well, let's begin with the Earth, its atmosphere, and the Sun. The Sun emits energy out into space, called solar energy. When the solar energy reaches the Earth, two things happen. Some solar energy is reflected by the top of clouds, ice sheets, and other shiny surfaces, but most of the solar energy passes through the Earth's atmosphere and heats up the surface of the Earth. As the Earth warms up, it releases heat up into the atmosphere. This heat is called thermal radiation. Some of this thermal radiation escapes out of the atmosphere and goes into space. However, there are certain gases in the atmosphere called greenhouse gases, which absorb and trap the Earth's heat inside the atmosphere. These greenhouse gases, or GHGs, are primarily water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and ozone. This keeps the surface of the Earth warm. In fact, if we didn't have the atmosphere, the Earth's average temperature would be closer to 0 degrees Fahrenheit, as opposed to its current average temperature of around 57 degrees Fahrenheit. So the greenhouse effect is a vital process that sustains life as we know it on the Earth. We're going to need 3 things to do this experiment. Firstly, we're going to need a source of thermal radiation, and we can use a candle. You can feel the thermal radiation, or heat, when you hold your hand next to the flame of a candle. So secondly, what we need is a sensor that can detect thermal radiation. What we will use is an electronic device called a thermopile. You can see that we built a little copper chamber around the thermopile. There's a thin film of plastic at the end of the sensor, which is just to stop the gas blowing into the candle. We are going to introduce different gases into this space and see how the gas changes the thermal radiation from the candle that reaches the thermopile. The third thing that we need is carbon dioxide gas. We will make this by mixing baking soda and vinegar.
Okay, let's try this. Here we have the green balloon with air in it. We're going to open this first valve, then we'll open the valve to the chamber, and as expected, nothing happens. The line stays steady. And now here we have the red balloon, that's the one with the CO2 in it. So we'll open the valve to balloon, open the valve to the chamber, and again, as we expected, the line goes down because the carbon dioxide is absorbing some of the thermal radiation from the candle. What this experiment shows is that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas and contributes to keeping the surface of the Earth warm by absorbing thermal radiation. Therefore, if we introduce larger quantities of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we expect the atmosphere to warm and cause global climate change.
Alright, so I'm guessing you all watched that video. Now, it's this simple. We know that some gases are greenhouse gases, meaning that they can absorb and release heat very efficiently. CO2 is such a gas. We know that we've been ramping up the amount of CO2 into the air ever since industrialization, and especially the last 100 years. So we know for a fact that CO2 is released more and more into the atmosphere. Therefore, it is perfectly logical to predict that we will see a warmer climate, which is what we do. Actually, take a look at this graph here. This is from NASA, okay? These are global measurements over time. There is an undeniable increase of the average temperature across the world. Again, these are just facts and logic.
Why would they do such a thing? Well, it turns out that the Copenhagen Summit in 2009 produced a treaty which openly calls for world government. This is the first time we've ever seen the words world government in a global treaty. And there are some at the UN who are using man-made climate change as an excuse to introduce this concept of the need for a world government. I covered this extensively in my video titled Lord Christopher Monckton, Climate Change and the New World Order.
Alright, I've never heard this part before, but let me just ask you, was it really the scientists who called for this, or was it political activists? Because one thing that I'm really fucking sick and tired of is how people like yourself, who claim to be against this notion of climate change, you point something out in the media and you say, aha, look at this, this proves that climate scientists are full of shit. Well, when it's actually not climate scientists who are saying what you claim that they are saying, it's actually political activists. An example of this is Al Gore. Al Gore made a video called An Inconvenient Truth, which contains, a lot of scientific errors. It's not trustworthy at all, that movie. I think like half the stuff is erroneous or exaggerated. So if you want to call out Al Gore for being wrong on climate change, I mean, by all means do so. But he's not an actual climate scientist. And you should not use him as an example that's interchangeable with an actual climate scientist. And also, I think it's funny as fuck that you mention Lord Christopher Monckton in your video when you want to argue against tyranny, when Monckton literally, and I mentioned this in my response to Computed Forever, he literally wants to put to jail people who believe in climate change. Yes, scientists who actually work with this stuff and who say, no, it's real, he wants to put them in prison. So either you are not aware of him advocating this, in that case, well, nobody should listen to you because you're not even that educated on this issue, or you do know about this and you're just a fucking hypocrite. In either case, it doesn't look good for you.
I'll leave a link in the description below for anyone who wants a more in-depth analysis. The bottom line is, man-made climate change is a lie designed to turn you into the enemy, who therefore needs to be regulated and controlled and united under their global umbrella. If you agree or disagree, you know what to do. All right, last but not least, statement number 10. Human beings did not evolve from apes. The more...
All right, he saved the best for last. Let's just watch this. Let's just watch this. I'm not going to interrupt or anything. Let's just watch this to the end.
The more we learn about quantum physics and biology on the microscopic level, the more evolution theory completely falls apart. In fact, Darwin stated in his book, The Origin of Species, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I can find no such case. I would...
Okay, actually I said I wouldn't interrupt, but I have to hear because that's a quote mining example. So many creationists have quote mined this quote, and they don't show the full context, which I will. I'm going to show it on the screen right now. So yeah, as you can tell, this is nonsense. It's bullshit. Once again, another fucking creationist takes Darwin out of context. What a surprise. Anyway, let's try and watch this to the end.
Argue that with what we've learned about in terms of broken down Darwin's theory because of a little thing called irreducible complexity. If your claim is that multiple life forms came about through a process we call natural selection, you have to be able to explain how these mutations take place on a molecular level with molecular machines that are irreducibly complex. Within the cells, we've discovered these tiny molecular machines called the bacterial flagellum, which is a really complex machine composed of many parts like a drive shaft, a rotor, a motor. And this is an irreducibly complex machine, meaning all parts must be present at the same time for the machine to function as a whole.
Okay, I know I'm breaking my rule again, but honestly this is just so dumb, I have to respond. No, this nonsense comes from a biochemist by the name of Michael Behe, and he suggested that the bacterial flagellum is irreducibly complex, which has been demonstrated to be wrong. Actually, the flagellum is composed of about 50 or so pieces, I believe. But it was found that you could actually remove 20 or so pieces, and it would still work. Meaning that even this simple machine, if you will, still had parts that were redundant, which indicates that it wasn't evolved from a conscious designer, but rather a natural process. So once again, this is nonsense.
A great example of an irreducibly complex machine is a mousetrap, which is comprised of 5 parts. A catch to hold some bait, a strong spring, a thin bent rod called the hammer, a holding bar to secure the hammer in place, and a platform on which the entire system mounts. Now, if any one of these parts is missing or defective, the mechanism will not work. All components of this irreducibly complex system must be present simultaneously for this machine to perform its function.
Lucky then that we again found that the flagellum is not irreducibly complex. In fact, almost half the components can be removed and it still works just fine.
This is the same with biological machines, like the bacterial flagellum motor, which is actually comprised of not just 5 parts, but over 40 complex parts that all must be present at the exact same time in order for the machine to properly
Again, nonsense.
function. For evolution theory to be true, you have to be able to explain how these machines could have formed by borrowing parts from other species in a process called natural selection, when all parts of the machine had to be present at the exact same time in order for that machine to function properly.
Again, it's simply not true. The machine, if you will, does actually work just fine with almost half the parts removed.
In the 21st century, we've learned it's a very complex world within the cell. Protein strains, for example, follow instructions that are laid out by our DNA to put together the components that are necessary for the parts of these molecular machines.
Oh, don't lecture anyone on my biochemistry, dude. I've read biochemistry, advanced biochemistry. I know my shit when it comes to this stuff. And you're full of shit. In fact, Yeah, the cell and the biochemistry of the cell is very complicated, yes. It's also very inefficient at times. In other cases, it's actually very efficient. But the point is, because of its complexity, you can be pretty sure that it wasn't, intelligently designed, because no designer who is supposed to be omniscient would ever design this convoluted mess, which is, well, let me just show you here. And as you can tell, it's really, 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 really complicated. But I would argue that this complicated mess is actually a sign that, no, your body wasn't intelligently designed, because if it was, that guy should be fucking fired. This is a mess. And it's very fallible. It is. It has so many different parts that, honestly, if you could, you could actually change them and make it much more efficient. I'm just saying, these are, once again, facts and logic.
So I would argue that if we truly want to be scientific about this, we need to follow the data, no matter where that leads us. And the data, in fact, does not lead us to an area which suggests that life came about by chance and natural selection. But rather, the data suggests there is intelligent design at play here. So therefore, natural selection and the theory of evolution may be able to explain the shape of the bird's beak, but it can never explain the bird itself. So that's my 10 statements.
It's very funny how a guy, in the beginning of his video, used biological science to argue that there are indeed gender differences. When he argued about transgenderism and whatnot. Now, it's funny because the only reason we even have that science to begin with is that it only makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. The only way you can make sense of us reproducing sexually, i.e. having two genders who reproduce instead of us simply copying ourselves, the only reason that makes sense is if we take into consideration our evolutionary past. Unless you do that, it makes no sense why humans don't just copulate by copying themselves instead of doing it sexually. Sexual reproduction is a huge sign that we are not intelligently designed, but rather that we have evolved over millions upon millions of years. Isn't that just the height of irony? Anyway, I'm going to cut it here. I've had enough. I don't think there's anything more to debunk anyway, so yeah, thank you all for watching. Bye.